Hello, BookTube. I realized earlier this morning that it had been quite some time since I made my way over to the Brattle bookshop here in Boston. Those of you who are new to the channel, that is a used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston. Really great place. Stock that turns over all the time, everything reasonably priced. There's a third floor for rare or collectible items, but the first and second floor are crammed with books on every subject under the sun except romance. And also there's a sale lot next door. That's huge. It's the whole floor plan of another building. And it's thousands and thousands and thousands more books, all at $1, $3, or $5. A browser's paradise, because they're not organized in any way. I spent a lot of time out there. I've spent a lot of time in that bargain lot. But one of you induced me to go to the Brattle because you called in store credit. You want more Brattle book hauls? You only have to do that. Simply call in store credit at the Brattle Bookshop. Just call them up. Make sure you're calling the Brattle Bookshop and not the Brattle Theater. There's a Brattle Theater here as well. But if you call the Brattle Bookshop, depending on who you get on the phone, all you'll probably have to do is say, I want to give Steve some store credit. You probably won't even have to identify me by last name, depending on who you get. They'll be expecting it. They'll know. And that's always wonderful. So one of you called in credit to the shop. That's always great. And that lured me out of my little chivy hole. So I went to the Brattle and I got a ton of books. I got 50 pounds of books. Those of you might be wondering, some of you are pining for Bag Tuesday. I'm afraid Bag Tuesday is a thing of the past. I have found my bag. That brown leather bag is the bag that I want. We went through a whole series of videos here where I found it, and then I Frankensteined it. I modified it. Got rid of the internal dividers, got rid of all the falderall, gave it a new strap. The strap works really well. The strap is from another bag, a different bag, one of you sent me. And that Frankenstein bag, I worried at first that the leather creaked. Doesn't creak anymore. You all told me that it wouldn't. You said new leather creaks, but once it gets comfortable, it won't do that anymore. And it is infinite. Just infinite in terms of how much it can comfortably carry. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So, I got a ton of books. And I was looking at this pile of books. We'll go through them all. But some of you always ask. Some of you are curious. So I should point out ahead of time that in this pile of books, I met 4 of these authors. And of those 4, 2 I knew well. And of those 2, one I hated and one I loved. So there you go. So now, let's look at what we have. All right, so of course, BookTube is going to interfere in some of these things. And the first 2 definitely, because the first 2 are part of, are for a looming BookTube event. June on the Range is coming up in June. A great BookTube event started by Michael K. Vaughan, where we read Westerns. And I found 2 Westerns that I will be reading for June on the Range. One is a name that I don't know. One of the names, I think I have another one by this author. One of the things I'm going to be looking at on June on the Range this year is how many new authors I can find, obviously, since there are 80 million of them. But this one, Walt Coburn, I don't think I've ever read anything by that author. This is called Law Rides the Range. And this is an old Popular Library. It's a smaller kind of paperback, and these are incredibly tough. These old Popular Libraries, that's just what they look like, just on top there. They're incredibly tough. This thing is, well, how old is this? It's probably 70 years old, this little paperback. Yeah, 1935? No, 1945? Something like that. I don't see a date on this thing, but this is going to be very, very old. And yet it's in perfect condition. And with a lovely cover illustration there. He is certainly free to grab my reins at any time. This is, what have we got here? When Wade Morgan killed influential Shotgun Riley in a gunfight and was forced to follow the Owl Hoot Trail to escape a bounty hunting sheriff, he left his son Joe behind to face Bull Mitchell's renegade crew. Mitchell owned Pay Dirt, Montana, and the county officers lock, stock, and barrel, but his position was threatened when Joe Morgan tacked up his lawyer's shingle and announced his plans to clean up the town. We got a lot of people going on here. Okay, so Joe Morgan, Wade Morgan's son, is now a lawyer. In the struggle that ensued, Joe was sided by a crusading newspaperman, a red-headed gambling girl, his father's old saddle-pard, Long Bob Birch, and Wade Morgan himself, who galloped into the ruckus in the last minute with 6 guns singing a deadly song of doom. I'm guessing that's son helping father on the cover there, but I'm all for it either way. Law rides the range. Then we have another one, and this is by an author that I think I've seen before, Steve Frazee. Pretty sure I remember that name. And this is an old Lion Books paperback. When did you come out, my dear? 1952. And this is Pistol Man. They're headed towards him. You've got Buttes in the background there. They're headed towards him, and he's thinking it would be a good idea to load his gun. This is, if those are Buttes, this is probably Montana or Arizona, which means he probably saw them coming about an hour and a half ago. Now he's thinking it'd be a good idea to load his gun. Well, what have we got? And the Boston Globe, no less, says he is a highly gifted writer. Clay Arbuckle was a strange breed of man. No one, not even Clay himself, knew where he stood, but everyone had heard whispers of his reputation that followed him through the deadly Dakota Badlands, and that was what Clay wanted to forget. He wanted to forget that he was hound dog lonesome, and that no man trusted him, and most of all he wanted to forget that his gun had pounded death into 5 men. But Clay Arbuckle had walked into the trail of vengeance all his life, and when he rode into South Fork, the killing started all over again. I love June on the Range. So I got those 2. But then the next 5 books here are also vaguely BookTube related in a way. I did a video yesterday about upcoming events in June on BookTube. And one of those is, in addition to June on the Range, there's also Book Trek, which has been going on this is the 3rd year. That was created by Vin at Revenant Reads. I'm one of the co-hosts for Book Trek, and as you could tell from the title, it's a celebration of Star Trek fiction. All kinds of Star Trek fiction. And I plan on reading and talking about a lot of Star Trek fiction over the course of the summer. Book Trek is going for the whole of the summer. But I'm going to start with the novelizations of the teleplays by James Blish that were once upon a time the only thing Star Trek fans could get in books, in book format, was James Blish's stories. And you got the first volume and then the second volume, Star Trek 1, Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, that had just photo stills from the show. And then Star Trek 4 through 10, you got beautiful cover artwork, just gorgeous original cover artwork. The stories I thought weren't anything to write home about, but they couldn't be. Blish didn't have the freedom to elaborate on them, and he didn't have the time. He was under strict deadline. But in addition to thinking that those Star Trek adaptations were nothing to write home about, I've also always thought that Blish himself was nothing to write home about. That as a science fiction author on his own, I thought he was distinctly third rate, even though so many science fiction fans that I've known over the years have said that's not true. Have said he's really, really good. He's well worth your time to read. I have been urged to do that by many science fiction fans, including a couple of science fiction fans who are also science fiction authors whose books you science fiction fans have read. So I figured for BookTube, it was high time I did that. Little spur of the moment thing. Wasn't part of my plans to reread. I do systematic rereads every year. I don't like the idea that of ever becoming the kind of reader that just consigns whole football fields of authors to, the nether region. No, I'm done. Now, I will do that with a handful of authors if I have tried them endlessly and there's just nothing there. But I keep a steadily rotating roster of authors that I'm just going to keep trying with to see. And usually one of the reasons why I will do that is exactly this. If critics whose good judgment I cannot deny are telling me that I'm just wrong about an author, that will usually be enough. It won't always be enough. Cormac McCarthy. But it will usually be enough. And I decided that as a sort of an adjunct to BookTube, James Blish would be one of those authors. I will go and reread James Blish and see if there is more there. Now, I'm perfectly aware that I'm not going to be unfair to him. I'm perfectly aware that science fiction authors of the time and place where he was writing in the genre often had to bang out manuscripts very quickly and often couldn't care or put their whole work into them. This was before the era when that was possible largely. So I'm not going to let his reputation in my mind sink or swim on any one book or any 2 books. But I found a bunch of James Blish. And I figured the gods must want me to re-examine this guy or I would have found none. So what have we got here? I found Warriors of the Day by James Blish. All in these mass market paperbacks. Kind of a dumb cover. But what have we got here? Tipton Bond was a man who lived for challenges, and Earth had no more challenges for him. But on Zota, one of the giant's faces bent over him, sardonically benign. You are an Earthman, little human electron. You are a denizen of a planet which the Warriors of Day will reach and engulf in a bare 1,000 years. Do you think to escape us by coming to Zota? You have brought yourself closer to the thing that you wanted to escape. You will share the general holocaust when the wild star arrives. Giants they might be, Bond decided, but they had limitations. What is the wild star? He called. The slow thunder answered, It is the most condensed of white dwarfs, almost pure neutronium throughout. And what makes a sun a runaway sun? The answer, little one, is very simple. The Warriors of Day. Okay, fine. All right, so then we have Titan's Daughter by James Blish. Again, it's just another old dorky paperback here. And what have we got here? Cena, the heroine of this remarkable novel by James Blish, is a tetraploid giantess. Taller, stronger, longer lived than normal men and women. The tetraploids, giant men and women created by genetic experiment, only wanted to live their lives in peace. But now a number of tetraploids have been murdered by a screaming mob of normals in Pasadena. I have never met anyone normal in Pasadena, much less a crowd of them. How long would the tetraploids survive in such a world? Great. Like I said, the gods must want me to read James Blish, because I found a bunch. This one is co-written with Robert Lowndes. This is The Duplicated Man. Paul Danton was a member of a subversive political party which had an answer. Make peace with Venus. But the only way to peace was through the overthrow of security. That's with a capital S. Must be a government agency of some kind. And Danton had found the only weapon which would make security's fall possible. The long-forgotten duplication machine. It had been well forgotten, for a machine which could make up to 5 duplicates of any living person was too dangerous to have around. But now, what if the top members of security were kidnapped briefly, and then suddenly there were 5 of each? No government could endure such chaos. Now, this book came out in 1959. That sounds a lot like the basic MacGuffin in The Price of the Phoenix, a Star Trek novel by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth. Right down to that question about, if there were suddenly 5 members of, 5 doubles of the leader of your government would collapse. I wonder if they read this. I wonder, is it possible that we can draw a chain of inferences? Did they read the James Blish adaptations of Star Trek, which they loved more than anything in the world, and then think, I wonder what else this guy wrote? And find his older books? Find this? Maybe the idea gets lodged in the brain? For a duplicate machine? Anyway, never read it, so. Then we have The Star Dwellers by James Blish, and here the title says Hugo Award winner. And what have we here? The inhabitants of Terra nicknamed them angels. They were exquisitely beautiful, these shimmering, fiery creatures, highly intelligent and playful. Yet they were awesome, too, considering that the youngest were 4 million years old, and the oldest had probably participated in the first cause, which had given birth to the whole universe. When did this come out? 1961. Was 1961 before the term Big Bang started to be commonly used? First cause. To young space cadet Jack Loftus fell the overwhelming responsibility of negotiating a treaty with them, a treaty which could mean the life or death of Earth and mankind. And the author bio here from the 1960s says that James Blish has won the most coveted prize, the Hugo Award. I wonder if that was true when the earlier books came out. I don't know exactly when he won the Hugo Award or for what. Was it for a case of conscience? Is that what won the Hugo? I don't know. I need to learn about this author. And then the last James Blish. I found a whole bunch of James Blish to go with. I have 2 or 3 books by him already. This is Esper by James Blish. Only the power of his brain held back an infinity of evil. This came out in 1952 and is dedicated to Henry Kuttner. What have we got here? Danny Caden just an ordinary guy on the outside, but inside his brain, Danny possesses strange and frightening powers. He can see and hear accidents before they happen. He can tell his friends where to find things when they lose them. He can read minds, walk through walls, and control inanimate objects. In short, Danny Caden is the most accomplished telepath, teleport, and telekineticist the world has ever seen. But one day, Danny Caden uses his powers to score a financial coup in the stock market. This arouses the interest of the FBI and also of a powerful crime syndicate. Suddenly, Danny is catapulted into mysterious worlds of the future where he finds himself fighting for his life and for the survival of the universe against the most fiendish plotters this side of infinity. All of these sound really good. They all do. I've got now a ton of James Blish, where I didn't before, that has nothing to do with Star Trek. So my side quest there is well underway. Then we have a classic. I couldn't pass this up for $1. I absolutely couldn't, especially since this has a lot of history with me. This is Edward Morris's edition of Horus. So this is a reprint. This is the University of Oklahoma Press reprinted this. And they would have reprinted this in the 1970s, I think. Is that right? Oh, I didn't know if you were going to tell me. Do you have any copyright information at all? 1967 is when they did it, but this originally came out in like 1940. And this is Horus. This is not Morris translating this. This is just Horus. But it's got, as you can see, a ton of textual notes. Just a ton. Just wonderful, wonderful. I know this book backwards and forwards. Never crossed my mind that I would ever see another copy. Now I have one, so that's fantastic. This is definitely going in the Little Book Room. I really don't think any of the Westerns are going in the Little Book Room. This is just an oddity. This will take 10 minutes to read. But I'd never seen it before. I'd never heard of it before. I've mentioned on this channel before the author Alfred Duggan, who isn't remembered anymore, but he wrote a lot of historical fiction that is really, really good. He was a really good historical fiction writer. And I knew that he wrote occasional works of nonfiction here and there. It's impossible to find secondhand Alfred Duggan in the United States in 2023. But that's exactly what I found today. I found his book, Arches and Spires. A tiny little thing that I believe was originally intended as a children's introduction to various styles of architecture that they can find throughout England. Like I said, it'll take no time at all to read. I doubt it's anything I'll want to keep. But the nice thing about the Brattle sale lot is that you can indulge in these whims. Nothing out there is expensive. So you can if you see something, you say, oh, that sounds interesting, just grab it. It's very much like a library in that regard, except you don't have to return the books. Then we have something, this is a little bit sun damaged, but I wanted to have, I never see this hardcover anymore. I know there are a lot out there. I love this book. Absolutely love it. Cannot recommend it strong enough. Talk about, I always say, that if you think nonfiction is boring, it's because you're reading the wrong nonfiction. It's not because nonfiction really is boring. And this is always on the list of books that I say, people say, well, okay, I don't read much nonfiction. I trust you that it's not the genre that's at fault. So what should I read? This is one of the ones I often recommend. I will fix the sun bleaching. This is Evan Connell's book, Son of the Morning Star, which is about Custer and the Battle of Little Bighorn and follows a kind of DNA helix in the structure of the book. You are winding around to Little Bighorn, and every so often at every loop you're intersecting until finally you get to the maelstrom of Evan S. Connell's reconstruction of the battle itself. But you get everything else here, all the people, all the personalities, all the politics, all the backstory. It's just an amazing where you see that's the sunbathing. But I can fix that. I will enhance those letters because I'm not giving this up. Usually I give this up because, like I said, people want an example of nonfiction that will really work for them. And this is one of the ones I recommend. I say, 1066 by David Howarth or this or a handful of other things. And I end up giving them away, but I'm not going to give this away. I'm going to hold on to this one and also reread it. I think it's high time that I reread it. Then this one was a find. Never seen this. I've only heard about it. I've never read it. I've read this author. The author is Wilfred Thesiger, and this is The Life of My Choice. This is an autobiographical volume of the great explorer, Wilfred Thesiger, who's also a great author. He wrote Arabian Sands and The Marsh Arabs. They're great books. I've read The Marsh Arabs I don't know how many times. And he traveled all over the world and lived rough. I believe he was still alive when this book came out and was living somewhere in the bush in Africa. And it's full of pictures. It's full of his reminiscences. He was a beautiful, beautiful prose stylist. Fantastic. I mean, I've never read it. It was right there, so I grabbed it and I will read it and experience it. Then we'll go from this book. The Life of My Choice is a biographical, a memoir that I've never read. We'll go from that to a memoir that I've read more times than I can count. This is At Random by Bennett Cerf. And there is the man himself. And this is his rags to riches story of getting into the publishing world, founding Random House, that sort of thing, all the adventures, all the authors that he knew, the type of thing where anecdote after anecdote that is like, I went up the rickety old elevator and opened the door and there was George Bernard Shaw in his knickers. That sort of thing. It's on every page. And it's delightful. Absolutely delightful. I always give this away. And which is why I didn't have one. I've been patiently telling myself for well over 2 years, the Brattle will provide. I always see copies of this. So it will show up. And it did. Never getting rid of this one. It's utterly delightful as far as memoirs go. And just like with all memoirs, maybe Thesiger included, I don't know, you have to take, a memoir is different from a biography. You have to take a memoir with a grain of salt. Or more than a grain of salt. In Bennett Cerf's case, he is going to go on. He goes on in this book about, the shoestring that I started with and my gut and my instincts, and we took a chance, and, there was George Bernard Shaw and whatnot. But the bedrock story of how he became a success in publishing is a lot simpler than that. And it's dealt with in depth in this book, so it's not like he ignores it. Boney and Liverite, the publishing concern of Horace Liverite, a man named Horace Liverite, had lots and lots of failures. Horace Liverite was not a good businessman at all. They had lots and lots of failures, lots and lots of dreams on the books, as one critic put it. But they also had something else. They had a property at Boney and Liverite called the Modern Library. And Bennett Cerf took one look at the Modern Library and thought, I want that. If I could get Horace Liverite to sell that to me, I could set up in business on my own. That would be enough on its own to set me up in business. And he sweet-talked Horace Liverite, and he dangled money in front of Horace Liverite. That was always the way to do it, because Horace Liverite never had any money. And eventually, Boney and Liverite sold him the Modern Library, and he started Random House. And it is proven to be absolutely the investment that he instantly saw that it was. It's an immensely popular property that is still ongoing today. But this is full of colorful anecdotes of all the literary figures of the time. Just very happy to find it. I will clean it up. I will put a dust jacket on it, and I will never let it go. Never. And then we have a hardcover. I saw this and honestly did not remember. I always give this away as well, and I honestly did not remember if I still had a copy. I haven't dug around to check and see, but I couldn't let it go for $1, so I grabbed it. And again, it's got a little bit of schmutz on it. I will clean it up and put a dust jacket over it, and this is no other book. This is a collection of pieces by Randall Jarrell, the great writer, the great critic, Randall Jarrell, that's his face smiling at you ghostly from the cover there. This was posthumous, and it is incredible. He's incredible. His writing is incredible. I don't know any other way to put it than that. If you go to your library, if it's a good university library, if it's fairly extensive, and you look up his name, probably your library will have a book that he wrote called Poetry and the Age. If you read that, I think you'll see what I mean right away. You'll see what I mean, and you'll probably want to read everything else. So I grabbed this. I don't know if this is a double or not, but I'm going to do a huge amount of rereading in it anyway, so whether it's a double or not. Then I found this. This is the Nantucket Diaries of Ned Rorem. He was an American composer, and he spent time on the island of Nantucket off the coast of Massachusetts. He had an enormously high opinion of himself as a composer. Totally unjustifiably. He wrote almost nothing that was worth listening to. But he also had a national reputation, carefully sculpted by himself. He never tired of doing that until he finally lost some steam. I think that Ned Rorem only recently died. He would have been a century old, but I think he only recently died. I think I remembered seeing that in the paper, or maybe being notified. The whole time that he was doing all of that, the whole time that he was promoting himself and showing up everywhere that he could in the press and writing these weird, diaphanous, totally forgettable orchestral pieces, he was also keeping a diary. And although it would have chapped his hide, it would have burned him to hear it, he's a first-rate diarist. His diaries are immensely worth reading. Far more so than anything else that his pen ever did. He would have hated that. He would have said, "No, the diaries might be good for a check. It's good that they're bringing in a little trickle of money." They brought in more than a trickle of money. These things sold once upon a time. They're forgotten now. He's forgotten now. But the diaries are worth reading. He's a tremendously energetic diarist, and brutally honest in a way that he wasn't always. In fact, was very seldom out in society, out in public. In his diaries, he will brutally rip apart some society doyen who's he's air kissing with her because he wants her praise and favor in person. Then he gets home to the diary and rips her to pieces, and the ripping is always done with art. These are marvelous to read. Somebody had this before me and filled it with page annotations. So there's no writing in the book, but I'll have to see where they let's see, for instance, where's this one? What does this one stop on? 1982. I am not a fool, but I maintain that nobody sits down to enjoy or even enjoy the terror and ugliness of Schoenberg or Boulez or Carter. He's absolutely right. No one enjoys that music. It's not meant to be enjoyed. And that is because the music, as music, does not say anything. Thus, there is no reason to it. Can you, for that matter, listen twice to Lucas Foss's quartet, which Seymour Barab contends is what music must sound like to a dog? What it says is said as convincingly in words. I am no less embarrassed by all the manly exponents, Harold Rosenberg, Barrett Newman, of the vastly expensive movement of abstract expressionism. What a self-congratulatory joke. Okay, well, it goes on and on from there. He's tremendously fun. I hope that this doesn't cause me to try and get all of his other diaries, because that's a lot. That'd be a whole shelf of books. But the Nantucket Diary, especially since he was relentlessly self-absorbed, but he also pays attention to his surroundings. This book will be full of evocations of a Nantucket that I know well, and that is mostly gone. So, and then the last thing, I promise, the last thing, this is a long Brattle haul. The last thing is a Shakespeare book, and I don't know anything about it, but I grabbed it when I took a glance at the table of contents. This is Aspects of Hamlet, and it's part of a series. There's also aspects of Othello and aspects of Macbeth. I don't know if there's more than that, but there are at least those other two. And here it is. That is the cover. Do any of you recognize that face? No? Any of you Star Trek fans? That's David Warner when he was very, very young. When he was a very young boy, that's David Warner, who was in Star Trek V. He was in Star Trek VI. He's Chancellor Gorkon. If there is to be a brave new world, our generation will have the hardest time living in it. He's also a kind of off the books Doctor Who, but he's been in everything else. He was also evil in Time Bandits. he's also the bad guy in Time Bandits. He's the devil, and million other things. What's the famous thing that I'm forgetting? He's in. I've sang the praises of the miniseries Masada, for instance. He's in that as Pomponius Falco, the oily creature, the climber from Rome who wants to take over things at Masada in Judea. He's the one who comes up with the idea of catapulting live Jews against the walls of the mountain until their relatives up on the mountain concede. But he did a bunch of other things. You'll know him from just everywhere. I'm blanking right now on the most famous thing that he did. And one of you will, I'm sure, remind me of it. There's one thing that you're going to know this guy for more than anything else. And I'm blanking completely on what it is. But despite the fact that I'm blanking on that, I'm a big lover of his work. I think his work is just incredibly good. And he had an enormous career on the boards. He had an enormous career as a Shakespearean actor. He played Hamlet very famously a long time ago in the 1960s. And he also played every other character. Every major and minor Shakespeare character, I'm pretty sure almost all of them. Would really be nice if we got a big biography of him. He did a lot of interviews. He also left a large amount of oral recordings behind. So not so much interviews as just tell us stories for as many hours as you can go. Give us 3 hours this afternoon, 2 hours the next afternoon. There's a vast body of that material. It was conscientiously gathered. I'm wondering if the person who conscientiously gathered it is ever going to get off their duff and write a book. It'd be great if we had a biography of this guy. But this is not about David Warner. He's just on the cover. I just thought when did this come out? 1979. So maybe his Hamlet run was from the early 70s, I think, or the late 60s. But the reason that I got this, I looked at the table of contents. And the table of contents runs like this. Studies in Hamlet. Hamlet Then Till Now by Harold Jenkins, who did the annotations on the great Arden edition of Hamlet. One of the greatest scholarly editions of Hamlet ever done. The Art of Cruelty, Hamlet and Vindus by R.A. Folks. Form and Cause Conjoined, Hamlet and Shakespeare's Workshop by Keith Brown. The Prince of Denmark and Claudius's Court by Julia McLuhan. To Say One, an essay on Hamlet by Ralph Berry. Hamlet and the Power of Words by Inga Stinka Eubank. Critical Disagreement about Oedipus and Hamlet by Nigel Alexander. And Hamlet and the Moria Encomium. That is by Frank McCombie. And the Moria Encomium is The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. It's an essay on Hamlet and the Praise of Folly, in which I guess the author is going to say that there was a lot of direct influence, one way or the other. I'm going to read that first, of course, but I'm going to read all the rest of this, because I have a Shakespeare shelf, a shelf of Shakespeare books. And Hamlet is not my favorite Shakespeare play, but Hamlet is probably the greatest single play ever written for the stage. The only competition it would have would also be from this author. It would be King Lear. But I don't know. I think King Lear very often just veers off into the hinterlands of sheer unfilmable genius. Whereas Hamlet is very much a matter for the stage, very consciously so. Either way, it's in the top 3. So there are no place better than this. And I have a few books on Hamlet and a shelf of books on Shakespeare. This is definitely going to go on there. But I grabbed it. I grabbed it. Aspects of Hamlet with an essay about Erasmus. You're not gonna stop me from getting that. So there you go. That was a Brattle haul for today. Let's see if we can do a Steve pyramid. We have Aspects of Hamlet with a young David Warner on the cover. Look at that. Oh my. We have At Random by Bennett Cerf. We have No Other Book, collection of Randall Jarrell. We have The Life of My Choice by Wilfred Thesiger. We have The Nantucket Diaries of Ned Rorem. Very nice. I'll probably dive into this quite a bit, too. We have Son of the Morning Star by Evan S. Connell, his book about Custer. We have Arches and Spires by Alfred Duggan. A little trippery that I'll read it very quickly, but I'm glad that I found it. We have the Edward Morris edition of Horus. Fantastic. Just fantastic to find. And then a bunch of mass market paperbacks. We have a bunch of James Blish and a couple of Westerns for June on the Range. So there you go. Those are our books for the Brattle, for my Brattle visit this week. I will not be going to the Brattle this weekend. Maybe next week we'll go back. And if so, well, make with the credit. And we'll see. I'll go anyway. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.